Thank you for the introduction, Nigel. Good evening, everybody. Noswaithar, pal. I hope you can hear me clearly. Just
We
check.
can.
That
Thank
perfect.
you.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully, I am going to share with you some interesting facts about the Pembrokeshire Islands. If you've not visited any of them before, it will be hopefully a little bit of an eye opener. As Nigel said, there's quite a lot of similarities between the birds of the Pembrokeshire Islands and the birds of Northwest Wales as well, your neck of the woods. So I will continue. Before I do, I just want to make a couple of thank yous, particularly to the island wardens. Nia Stevens on Ramsey Island has provided some information, the background information and statistics for Ramsey and Grassholm. Lisa Morgan and the island wardens on Skomer and Skokholm from the Wildlife Trust South and West Wales are always very helpful. And actually, quite a lot of the information I'm going to share with you is publicly available. It would take you a while to pull it all together, so I've done that for you, and I'll show you those in a second. Skomer and Skokholm in particular have excellent island blogs where you can delve and find out a lot more information. So let me just got to click past that. Okay, just a quick bit about me, and thank you again to Nigel for the intro. So, I've lived in Pembrokeshire since the late 80s. My parents relocated from southeast England, and I've lived in Pembrokeshire, bar a 3-year stint in university in Devon, ever since. I live in the southwest corner of the middle part of Pembrokeshire, a place called St Ishmael's. It's not far actually from where you would get the boat. If those who've been to Skomer before, I'm in that neck of the woods. It was actually 2014 that I started West Coast bird watching. So I've been a keen birder, and I've always been keen to share things with other people through the Wildlife Trust the Pembrokeshire Bird Group, guided walks with them, obviously in a voluntary capacity, and I realised there was demand perhaps for that to be semi-professional. So since 2014, I've been leading guiding trips mainly in Pembrokeshire. But I've just thrown a few flags up there of places overseas that I have led tours mainly since 2018 when I left my full-time job working in local government. Oman, Senegal, Canada, the Cape Verde Islands, the Canaries, Georgia and Armenia being the most recent ones. And as Nigel said, as well as doing guided trips, so Skomer would be one area, one island I'd visit on a regular basis for that purpose. I'm also very fortunate that to sort of keep it varied, I do a bit of survey work, and most relevant to this talk is for the last 5 years, I've been under contract to do work with gannets on Grassholm. So I'll perhaps come back to that when we get to gannet in the talk. And I'm just going to mention, some of you will have come across this. This is the Pembrokeshire Birds blog. It's a website essentially, but it's a multi-contributor blog. If you've got any interest in Pembrokeshire birds, or you're coming down for a visit anytime, I'd recommend having a look. It's mainly, as you see in the centre there, sort of recent sightings, but you will find links, and I've circled the bottom corner there, links to the island blogs, which if you've not found them before, it's an easy way to find them through the Pembrokeshire Birds blog. So I'd highly recommend a visit. And there's the best of them. I'm sure the other islands wouldn't mind me saying, is the Skokholm blog. So since Richard Brown and Giselle Eagle were there, I think they first moved to the island in 2013. They've done a daily blog for all the time they've been out there, which is sort of 9 months of the year. So an incredible sort of story of their time on the island and everything that goes on a bird observatory. Um, these are the islands I'm going to mainly refer to, and in fact, it's mainly going to be Ramsey, Skomer and Midland and Skokholm, and our Grassholm I'll specifically mention when we get to Gannet. But it's worth mentioning the Bishops and Clarks, which are half a dozen islands to the north and west of Ramsey. Most of them are owned by the RSPB, and South Bishop itself, with the lighthouse, is owned by Trinity House. And down in the bottom corner on the right, some of you will have heard of Caldy Island, famous for its monastery, but actually quite important for seabirds, nesting gulls in particular, and St Margaret's, which is a small island off that. So that's the sort of geography. That's pretty much most of Pembrokeshire, bar the top northeast corner that borders Ceredigion. And just a quick run through the islands themselves. Obviously, I could probably talk about each of these islands for an hour on their own, but this is an aerial view of Ramsey looking north, the mainland to the right, Ramsey Sound through the centre, where you can see the boat running through. It's been an RSPB reserve since 1992. It's about 4 kilometres from north to south and a kilometre across at its widest. And the Ramsey Sound is supposedly, so I'm told, the second most dangerous stretch of water in the UK. You're probably going to wonder what's the most dangerous, and I don't know the answer to that, but we should all be looking it up after the talk. You can see there, just if you can see my cursor just to the left of that boat trail, this is called the Bitches, which creates some excellent rapids for canoeists, but also very dangerous water if you're in a boat. You'll see from that aerial shot down to the south, especially, there's a lot of off islands, so a number of smaller islands. This large one is Ennisberry, which all form part of Ramsey. The key thing about Ramsey, and when we come on to talking about seabirds, is that rats were eradicated in around about 2000. And just worth mentioning, the island warden at the time was Ian Bullock, who sadly passed away this week. He oversaw that rat eradication, and yeah, his legacy will live on when you hear about the success for seabirds that's led to. This is a different view of Ramsey looking from the south, and just to show in the foreground there some of the bishops and clerks. So they're all bought by the RSPB in one purchase back in '92. This is the southernmost island. This is South Bishop. The one I mentioned has got a lighthouse on it. So when you're on Ramsey, you get a very good view of it.
Oh,
Obviously at
Hormayada.
night, at night you can see that light from the mainland. It's the only lighthouse along that stretch of coast on the northwest part of the mainland part of Pembrokeshire. Um, Several seabirds breed out on the island, including puffins on some. Um, Moving slightly south, but further out, this is Grassholm. So Grassholm is also an RSPB reserve. It was actually the first reserve for the RSPB in Wales. It was purchased in 1948. And ever since then, gannets have been steadily increasing from the northeast corner through to the southwest. So in fact, the colony is actually more extensive than that aerial shot shows. It obviously taken a few years ago. It's only about 400 meters from one side to the other. And it's the third most important site for northern gannet in the world after Bass Rock and St Kilda, both of which are in Scotland. It's obviously so very important in a Welsh context. I know you've now got some gannets breeding in North Wales, which is fantastic. But this is by far and away the largest colony. One thing to point out: this is one island you can't land on. I feel a bit smug saying that I can. That's not meant to be that, but there's no easy way on and off this island, as I can tell you. And yeah, to avoid disturbance to the gannets, basically, you can take a boat trip out to it, but you can't land on it. And this is the view you'd get from a boat. This is obviously looking to the side of the island that's completely covered in gannets. They've sort of taken up at virtually every part of rock that they can. And I'll just move on to the next one. So this is, I didn't show this on the slide because it would have reduced the scale somewhat, but further out, so another 13 kilometers west of Grassholm is the Smalls. A series of rocks. This is the largest one. This has got a lighthouse on it, as you can see. The original one was erected. Sorry, this was erected in 1861. The original lighthouse, a wooden structure, was erected in 1776. Some of you may have heard of the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy. This is the site of that, and it spawned a couple of films and a BBC radio play due to the tragedy. So I won't go on to that, but I've got time tonight. But definitely something to look up if you're interested to learn more about the Smalls. This is probably the most famous Pembrokeshire island. So this is the view you get of Skomer from the Deer Park, which is the nearest point on the mainland. We're looking across Jack Sound. Actually, this bit in the middle, the greenest bit, is actually Midland. So there's another gap just beyond that before you reach the main part of Skomer, and we're looking west there. Skomer, this is the farm in the centre of the island, was actually technically farmed into the 1940s. It was purchased by a predecessor of the Wildlife Trust in the 1950s, and now actually belongs to Natural Resources Wales, but it's leased to the Wildlife Trust, who manage it and have done for many years. Just to give you an idea, it's 750 acres, which is 3 kilometres one end to the other and about 1.5 north to south. It's got every designation you could imagine. It's a National Nature Reserve, a triple SI. It's actually got the first Welsh Marine Conservation Zone all the way around it. And a lot of the old walls form part of scheduled ancient monuments. There's a lot of interesting human history on this island in particular. Um, the island gets this is the one that gets the most visitors. So during the season between April and September, a maximum of 250 visitors can go to Skomer 6 days a week, so not Mondays. The busy period is obviously the season when Atlantic puffins are breeding, which is May, June, and July are the key months for that. So if you've never been to Skomer, I'd highly recommend it. It's a fantastic place to visit, as you'll see hopefully from some of the slides to follow. And just to mention Skomer's importance in a national context. So the seabird monitoring program has four key sites, which you can see on the map on the right, and Skomer is the only one in Wales. What that means is an enhanced level of monitoring of seabirds and what we know about seabirds in the UK, a lot of that is from studies that are undertaken on Skomer. This is not a particularly useful picture, I guess. It's a picture of Midland. So this is looking from the sea on the mainland side, looking at the cliffs. So Midland's got a lot of the same birds as Skomer, just in smaller numbers, breeding Manx Shearwaters, auks on the cliffs, kittiwakes, fulmars, and so on. It's actually owned by the National Trust, but is just about or has just been leased to the Wildlife Trust. So they'll manage that whole site. It's kind of really part of the same place. It's just 21 acres, only 700 meters from the mainland to Jacksown. But the important point is it's only 100 meters between the two islands. So I'll come back to that when we talk about invasive predators. Dream Island, this is Skokholm. It's a bird observatory. It's just southeast of Skomer. If you remember from the early slide I put up, it's about 3.5 kilometers, 2 miles from the mainland, and 3 kilometers to the south of Skomer. It was the first bird observatory in the UK, established by Ronald Lockley, quite a famous owner and resident of the island in the 1930s. The bird observatory was established in 1933. More recently, it was in private hands for many, many years, but in 2006, the Wildlife Trust bought the island with a massive fundraising drive and have subsequently purchased the lighthouse as well. And now own and manage the island. They'd managed it for the 50 years previously. And great to be able to say that in 2014, after quite a lot of work, particularly by volunteers, it's now re-established itself as a bird observatory. So it's one of just 20 bird observatories in the UK. This is the landing. When if you ever go to Skokholm, this is what will greet you. A nice mural with Manx Shearwaters and European storm petrels on it. There are no day landings. You can't go for the day, but you can visit for 3 days or more. And this shows you Skokholm's position. It's along with Bardsey, the two bird observatories that are in Wales as part of the 20 bird observatory network across the United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland. And if you've never been to Skokholm, this is the famous Lockley's cottage. This is the cottage he renovated in the through the 1930s. It's in good condition, as you can see. This picture was taken a few years ago, but it's very well looked after now. Again, overseen by the Wildlife Trust, but it wouldn't be in the condition it's in without an army of volunteers to look after the buildings. Scooting around to the south of the county, so we're sort of almost towards, we're just off the coast of Tenby. There's Tenby here on the right. That's the South Beach. This is Caldy with the monastery. Some private houses, a couple of farms, and parts of the island very important for breeding seabirds. But in particular, the bit at the back there that I've circled in red, it doesn't look very big on this picture, is St Margaret's. I think I've got a picture. This is St Margaret's from the sea, probably towards the end of the breeding season. There are a few seabirds on the cliff. St Margaret's again is owned by the Wildlife Trust. So you'll see the Wildlife Trust is taking a big plays a big role in Pembrokeshire in terms of birds and particularly seabirds. Yeah, so Margaret's is studied. There's no warden. It volunteers and the Wildlife Trust staff count the birds every year. There's no one lives there. It's cut off from the main island of Caldy. Although a very low spring tide, it's joined. I don't think you can actually walk across, but just to give you an idea, it's not as remote as some of the other islands. And just before I move on to the birds, just to talk about what's so important about the islands, other than they're not part of the mainland, and it's the absence of predators. I mentioned for Ramsey that rats were eradicated in 2000, and it actually is the only one of these islands that's ever had rats. But if you go to these islands, you won't be seeing any rats. You won't see hedgehog stoats, foxes, badgers, anything of that, anything that could get into a burrow nesting seabirds and to take either an egg or a chick. Are not there. There are some voles, there are some mice, but they don't cause the seabirds any problems. And that's why these islands, it's essentially why they're so important. And just to say, we can't rest on our laurels in terms of what we call biosecurity on the islands. Um, there's two photos here. If you can just make out that there's an inset in the top left, which is a fishing boat, which unfortunately ran into Skomer a couple of winters ago and spent 24 hours sort of stuck, wedged onto the rocks of the island. And the main picture you can see bottom right, there's a small lifeboat which inconveniently fell off a passing tanker and washed ashore against Skokholm. The key issue here is you can see the doors open on this lifeboat here. You might just better make that out. Is the possibility that rats could have been in either of these vessels and made their way ashore. So the Wildlife Trust and the island staff and all the visitors need to be vigilant. And when things like this occur, enhanced monitoring takes place to ensure that rats haven't made it ashore. Because if they were to be there for any length of time and establish themselves, it's almost trying to shut the stable door after the horse has bolted. So I'm pleased to say in both of these cases, both of which were in the last 2 years, neither of them led to any sort of incursion of unwanted predators. And just about to get into the birds now. Many of you and all of you, I would imagine, are probably aware of the Birds of Conservation Concern. There's a UK version. This is the Welsh version. The last publication was in 2022. As we go through the slides for the birds, I've highlighted their status in Wales, so you can see you'll hopefully start to see how important the Pembrokeshire Islands are to birds in Wales. I've focused on red and amber listed birds, so birds which are, of particular either they're on the red list because they're birds in decline or they're birds of concern, which is essentially what the amber list is. So I'm going to focus the main part of the talk now, the next probably 20 minutes or so. I'm going to focus on the breeding birds. I'm going to skip through the first ones fairly quickly, but just to give you a flavour of the birds that breed on the islands and the relative abundance. So first one is an unwanted non-native bird. We could talk I'm sure we could talk about Canada geese afterwards. Anyone got any questions? But I don't think they're particularly welcome on the islands. But we've got regularly 10 to 11 pairs on Skomer and a couple of pairs on Skokholm. And the last census on Ramsey, there were two pairs breeding there. It's amazing some of the places they get to, including the off islands, not just the main islands, but they manage to breed on some of the uninhabited islands as well, and can do quite well if they're not kept in check. Sticking with, I'll move on from geese onto ducks. There's no other breeding geese on the islands. Ducks breed sporadically, particularly on Skomer because it's got a couple more water bodies. North Pond is the largest water body. Spring fed these are in the main. They do dry up in the summer. So Mallard, Skomer 1 to 5 pairs, Skokholm 1 to 6, Ramsey 2 pairs. They've all got ponds. The ducks don't tend to do so well on the islands, as you might imagine, living in the middle of what are all important gull colonies. Chicks, small chicks are easily preyed upon by the gulls. So occasionally they do okay and manage to raise a few chicks, but not often. So here's a slide of shoveler. This is on Skomer, and the inset there is a brood of ducklings. I think there's 10, 11 there. They didn't make it, sadly. They were there one day, gone the next. So it's a precarious place for a duck to breed, but they try. Uh, Shelduck, much the same. Shelduck probably a little bit better at protecting their chicks. This chick, I think it was one of 5 or 6, and it's definitely a few days old there. So that one probably made it. But I know in 2023 there was a brood of 9, and 4 days later there was one. This actually might be that bird actually. So again, don't do too well. Gadwall, this is the female. Gadwall try and breed. Again, Skomer is the place they generally try and breed because of the larger ponds. And they have successfully raised chicks in the past. I think the wardens ended up adopting one once when they tried to make their way to the sea, and one of them didn't make it down one of the streams. Moorhen. If you go to Skomer in the any time of year, particularly the autumn, you'll see quite a lot of moorhens. They don't tend to do massively well, but maybe up to six pairs breed around the wet areas, generally away from the pond itself, but they'll be somewhere nearby in a damp area. So Skomer and Skokholm both about half a dozen pairs. Occasionally, one pair breeds on Ramsey. Even more secretive in terms of breeding is water ale. This was a picture, not the best picture in the world, but it was taken by me on Skomer. They haven't been proved to breed on Skomer, certainly not in recent years, but they were trail cameras revealed their presence on Skokholm. Four chicks were seen in 2021 at a place called the Well, which is a small little wet area with a hide. So they probably do breed undetected most years. They're certainly there and you hear them. But yeah, very skulking, as I'm sure you know. Another non-native, fortunately, only on Skomer. So this sort of hints at the past, Skomer's agricultural past. In particular, we've still got pheasants on Skomer. There's around about 8 to 10 pairs. Yeah, they are successful, but I think they also probably provide food for the buzzards in particular, the chicks. So they're hanging on, but they're not particularly abundant, but they are there, and they probably do have some impact on the native flora and fauna. Moving on to waders, so we've got two species of wader that regularly breed on the island, the most abundant of which is oyster catcher. So Skomer's got around 60 pairs and they breed in the centre of the island on the cliff tops, on ledges, on grassy ledges. And they're pretty stable, between 50 and 70 pairs most years. They're regularly over on the mainland feeding, but during the breeding season spend most of the time on the island. Skokholm's got a similar number. The last census was 61 pairs, so much the same. And about half that number, 25 to 30 pairs regularly breed on Ramsey. They're probably on most of the islands, in fact. They definitely breed on Grassling. Probably not censused every year. So they're doing pretty well. Um, this one isn't doing so well, as it's not pretty much everywhere. This is Eurasian curlew. Um, the last census, I believe, last year there were 3 pairs, and they at least two of the pairs raised at least one young. So that's a positive story. But just to put it in context, we don't have any other curlew breeding in Pembrokeshire. There are none on any of the islands or the mainland. You've got to go quite some distance before you find breeding curlews in the uplands of mid Wales. So this is probably a doomed species, one would think, in terms of being such an isolated and small population. This is actually a chick I photographed on a path. It's like running away, as you'd imagine a chick would do when surprised by a bird watching group. But this was successful. This bird did fledge. And it was really nice to see. A bird that actually, I put this in even though it doesn't no longer breed, just really as just to sort of highlight the point. So we've lost lapwing as a breeding species in Pembrokeshire many years ago. And the last place they bred in Pembrokeshire was on Ramsey Island. I think the RSPB did their best to look after them and protect them, but it was just unfortunately fighting a losing battle. So yeah, this is probably not a slide I'll include in this talk for much longer, sadly. Birds of prey. So as you can imagine, on the islands with lots of seabirds and other breeding species, as the ones I've already shown you, and I've got some to come. We've got birds of prey. They tend to, in terms of their numbers, be fairly stable because their food supplies are fairly stable. So common buzzard breeds on at least the three main islands. Skomer has more than the rest. It's got 5 pairs. It's a bigger island, and one each usually on Skomer and Ramsey. Peregrine falcon, always exciting to see. And if you visit one of the Pembrokeshire Islands, you will almost certainly see a peregrine during the breeding season. Skomer has between 2 and 4 pairs, which usually do well. In fact, one of the breeding females on Skomer last year was ringed, and we traced it back. It was come out of a nest in Ceredigion, so just to show some of the movement with peregrines even in this part of Wales. And Ramsey, yeah, about 3 pairs as well. Ramsey's they're usually a breeding pair on one of the obvious cliffs, actually. If you go to Ramsey and have a walk around the footpath, you should see them. And Skokholm has 1 pair, although they're generally not successful, and I'm not quite sure why that is. Kestrel doesn't breed on Skomer anymore. The last breeding attempt was 11 years ago. Again, not quite sure what that is. The main reason for it, there's certainly voles on there. Maybe the shorted owls are taking most of the voles, but I'll come on to that. Um, yeah, pair on Ramsey, but they don't breed on Skokholm anymore. And in fact, Kestrel, maybe this just mirrors the fact that Kestrel isn't doing that well in Pembrokeshire as a whole. Not sure what the latest breeding estimate is, but it will be just about in double figures, but not much more. I just mentioned shorted owl, so maybe surprisingly, shorted owl does breed on the Pembrokeshire Islands. It's most famous for Skomer. So if you go to Skomer in the spring and summer, you've got a pretty good chance of seeing shorted owl. If you're there on a day trip, you'd almost definitely see them if you're there staying overnight. Usually two, three, four pairs. Their success kind of linked to Skomer vole is a race of bank vole, and that's what they eat. In the 1990s, there was a year where 12 pairs bred, which is unimaginable, really, and it must have coincided with a very bumpy year for voles. But yeah, it's much more usually two or three, and they're always a delight to see. They have bred on both Ramsey and Skokholm. The last breeding on Skokholm was 2017, and it's not regular, so it's mainly Skomer. Quite where they go when they're not on the islands, we don't know. We certainly do see some on the mainland in Pembrokeshire in the winter. An owl that is no longer on Skomer, it was is little owl. Obviously, you'll probably be aware little owl was introduced to the UK in the 18th century. Probably not that welcome on the islands. They've got a penchant for storm petrels, apparently. So this was taken in 2023, but they hadn't bred on Skomer for a few years, and they haven't been seen since. So that's probably a good thing. There's still at least one pair on Ramsey, although usually two. Um, and they're not that common on the Pembrokeshire mainland anymore, actually. So we may be sort of moving towards not seeing little owl on the islands anymore. It may be a surprise given these islands have no trees. Well, they certainly don't have any trees in now. They would have done historically. That wood pigeon manages to breed on the islands, about five pairs on Skomer and 10 on Ramsey. There are small bushes and shrubs big enough to hold a wood pigeon's nest, so that's where they do breed. Um, we've got, it's not so clear this picture actually, breeding swallows. So a handful of pairs on each island, maybe 10 on Skomer, five to seven between Skomer and Ramsey. So usually obviously around the buildings. A lot of the buildings are left open and hides, the public hides, they like to breed in there. House martin are slightly less regularly, so they're pretty much tied to nest boxes. This is on Ramsey. This is on the farmhouse on Ramsey. They do well there. For example, they had nine successful pairs just 12 months ago. Skomer had one pair in 22 and 23. They only returned in 2021 after some boxes were put up. They'd last bred there in the 1960s and early 70s, so they can be encouraged, but again, it'll only ever be small numbers. Skylark's an interesting one. So on Skokholm Island, we've got the last census was 13 territories in 2022. So a dozen pairs or so probably, but it seems none on any of the other islands. There's a singing bird on Skomer. We see them in the autumn, in particular on autumn migration, flocks going over, visible migration, but they breed on the mainland directly opposite. So there's something about Skokholm which is more attractive than Skomer. Meadow pipit is quite common on all the islands. Most numerous on Skomer just purely because of its size. So any pipit you see in the centre of the island is going to be a meadow pipit, and they're great to see singing in the spring, doing their parachute song flight. So just under 100 pairs, 80 odd on Ramsey and 40 something on Skokholm. So quite a common bird on the Pembrokeshire Islands. Rock pipit. Similarly, but the smaller numbers, they tend to be difficult to see during the breeding season because they disappear down the cliffs. They're often just out of sight, and their breeding sites are usually out of sight. But we're probably the most numerous actually is Skokholm, about 50 territories, and then 20 on Skomer and 40 on Ramsey. Pied wagtail, familiar to most of you, I'm sure. Breeds on the three main islands. Ramsey is the most numerous. Ramsey's got quite a lot of buildings concentrated in one area, and most of them tend to breed around there. So they've got lots of old farm buildings. It was farmed most recently, and may have something to do with it. So a dozen pairs on Ramsey, and then half a dozen on each of the other islands. Wren can't go anywhere without seeing a wren. I don't think we can claim that the island wren in Pembrokeshire is any different to any of the others, but I suspect there's no movement between the island and the mainland. I don't think anyone's ever studied it though. But they're in because of all the old stone walls, in particular, and the rocky outcrops. They love them. So, Skomer, for example, 81 territories on the last census, and sort of 50, 60 on the other two islands. So, again, quite a common bird, but more often heard than seen. Similarly with Dunnock, less numbers. We're talking about a dozen pairs on Skomer and Ramsey. Skokholm doesn't breed regularly on Skokholm. Slightly further out, a few kilometres offshore rather than almost joined to the mainland. So probably got something to do with it. But they do occasionally have a breeding pair or two on Skokholm. European stone chat, so very common on the Pembrokeshire mainland. It's a real feature of the Pembrokeshire coast path. If any of you have ever walked the Pembrokeshire coast path in the spring, you can't go more than a few hundred metres without seeing stone chat usually around the Gorsey patches. Not so common on the islands. The Ramsey is the island they like best. 17 pairs there, but only between one and four on Skomer and Skokholm. So they're not so easy to see during the breeding season, which is unlike the northern wheatear. Again, Ramsey is the most attractive because of all the stone walls, because of the agriculture being far more recent. The walls are in much better condition. Nearly 100 pairs on Ramsey, just 30 on Skomer and Skokholm. And I just wanted to briefly mention because I'm a bit obsessed with colour rings. I'm not a ringer, but I like as a birder I like looking for birds that have got colour rings and being part of the citizen science, as it were. A guy called Ian Beggs has been studying wheaties on Skokholm for the last 5 or 6 years. And if you're at all interested, I don't know if he's moving on to Blue Sky like most of us, but he's on X on Twitter as Fat Snipe, and you can find out more about his studies also on the Skokholm blog. But the point of showing it here is the picture. The main picture is actually a Skokholm wheatear F07. I photographed on Skomer, which is so the study has already shown that the birds move between the islands. So I think I've seen 10 different birds on Skomer, and I've seen a few on the mainland opposite as well. Not very far, but although they're generally faithful to coming back to Skokholm, they do occasionally use the adjacent mainland and the island of Skomer. Um, Continuing the theme of birds that are familiar maybe in your garden that also occur on the island, this is the blackbird. So Ramsey's got 25 pairs. Again, I think they like the walls and the buildings there. Skokholm and Skomer 9 to 10. But yeah, they're pretty successful on there. That's a juvenile and it was ringed on Skomer. Moving on to warblers, we've got common whitethroat. So there's a few white warblers that breed regularly on the islands. Whitethroat's one. Skomer's the best place to see it. Sort of 7 pairs, 5 on Ramsey, none on Skokholm. Sedge warblers more common, 25 pairs on Skomer. They like the damp areas. They're not necessarily by the ponds, but anywhere the damp valleys they like. And what is one of the sounds of Skomer actually, on top of the seabirds, is to hear sedge warblers singing in the spring. Blackcap only occasionally, one pair on Ramsey in 2023, for example. The same with Chough, a pair bred on Ramsey in 23, has bred on Skomer, occasionally sings on Skokholm into late spring, but not necessarily successful. Spotted flycatcher is actually not, I don't know about North Wales, it's not particularly common in Pembrokeshire anymore, anywhere, but has occasionally bred on Ramsey in recent years. There was a pair in 2023. So they do occasionally pop up. Moving on to finches, the linnet is the common linnet of the Pembrokeshire coast path, a bit like the stonechat, as I just mentioned. And they like Ramsey in particular, over 60 pairs, just 5 on Skomer and none on Skokholm. So the vegetation isn't quite suitable for them on those islands. A recent colonist, if I could call it that, is the goldfinch. So doing very well in gardens on the mainland, particularly as a result of feeding. They do like, it seems, sunflower hearts and Niger seeds, I think. They have bred on Skomer in recent years. I think the last successful breeding was 22. They were definitely there this year. Sorry, in 2024. I don't know if they were successful. Again, that's an interesting change in recent years. Excuse me, just gone the wrong way there. That the a bird that's gone seems to have gone the opposite way is reed bunting. Not quite sure why. Habitat hasn't changed, but they used to sort of fairly regularly breed on Skomer, and they haven't bred for a few years. Skokholm, they're still there. two pairs there, and the occasional breeding pair on Ramsey. Moving on to the corvids, the starting at the bottom, I suppose, in terms of size, jackdaw, quite common on Skomer. So 64 pairs. They like breeding in sort of the rocky cliffs out of the way, sometimes in small colonies. Skokholm, about half that number, sort of just under 30 pairs. They definitely also breed on Ramsey, but there's been no recent survey. But you'll see plenty of jackdaws when you go to the islands and in flocks in the out of the breeding season. Magpie is down to no pairs on Ramsey. Don't breed there anymore. They're a rarity on Skokholm. Again, the distance is probably just a bit too far for them, but there are regularly three or four pairs on Skomer, and generally successful, sort of two to three chicks per nest. Um, Raven, and this is one of my favourite birds of the Pembrokeshire coast. So they breed on all the islands. Only four pairs on Skomer, but again, they tend to be successful. One or two pairs on Skokholm, usually two, and Ramsey also four pairs. But again, sometimes it can be down to two. Some years they're successful, some years they're not. Again, I guess it depends on all sorts of other factors, but particularly their access to food during the early breeding season that they're famous for. Um, and this, yeah, sort of flock. This is. I wanted to mention a flock of ravens in the. If you go in the autumn, it's a bit like I know you used to have a gathering of ravens. You probably still do in the autumn and winter. Is it Newborough, on somewhere on Anglesey? It used to be a similar thing on Skomer. It seems to be less of a feature. I can remember just 5 years ago seeing 90 odd ravens at a gathering in September, probably in tune with the Manx Shearwater breeding. Yeah, it's a fantastic sight to see. We still get 30 or 40 most autumns. Probably our most famous corvid, though, is red-billed chough, as it is with you in North Wales. In fact, the chough is the reason that Ramsey purchased the RSPB purchased Ramsey was in particular for red-billed chough. So there's currently nine pairs on Ramsey itself. It's perfect for them really in terms of the grazing that takes place there and the access they've got to the sea caves that they love. There's seven pairs on Skomer and four on Skokholm, and we've got about 80 to 90 pairs around Pembrokeshire. They're doing well. Lots of management that takes place on the coast path is for Chough, the great coastal grazing. So yeah, they're doing well with us. Okay, I'm moving. This is my sort of the last main bit now before I just finish with a few rarities at the end. Seabirds. I just wanted to make the point, I suppose, that whilst the Pembrokeshire Islands are absolutely, really important for seabirds, that we're not short of threats. So just sort of from top left, this is a young gannet on grassholm that's entangled and didn't make it, sadly, as you can see from the photo, in fishing nets. Erebus top right, so we've got quite a lot of floating offshore wind planned for the Celtic Sea. They're putting in test sites at the moment, and they're sort of in the flight line really of if not well migration, but particularly feeding areas for some of our seabirds, and so there's a lot of discussion underway at the moment about that. Bottom right, obviously we're all aware of the warming seas, particularly the global marine heat wave in 2023. I don't think it was quite as warm last year, but you may be able to correct me on that. But again, another obvious threat to our seabirds. And bottom left, it's not such an issue here in Pembrokeshire. It's more of a North Sea issue, but again, something to be aware of is a pressure on sand eel fisheries, which obviously, particularly our puffins, really depend on. So I'll just run through these. Well, first ones quickly, and I can spend a bit more time on the really important ones. So cormorants breed around the Pembrokeshire Islands. In fact, St Margaret's down by Caldy is the most important site in Pembrokeshire, with 150 pairs bred there in 2023. The other islands they're sporadic, so they haven't bred on any of those islands apart from Midland in the last couple of years. So they seem to be concentrated in a few key sites now in Pembrokeshire. The shag is slightly more widely distributed, but in smaller numbers. So Ramsey, 13 pairs, Skomer 5. There's about the same number also on Caldy and on Midland. Coming to the gulls now. Great blackback gull, the largest gull on planet Earth. We have quite a few in Pembrokeshire. This bird you'll see W064 is a ring bird. There's an ongoing study on Skokholm. A lot of colour ringing of gulls taking place there. This bird was on Skomer. It breeds on Skomer, but it was ringed as a chick on Skokholm in 2014. It's been breeding on Skomer since 2020. But we're looking at a fairly stable population. In the main, Skomer's about 120 pairs, Skokholm's 60 to 70, although it has declined a bit in recent years, and the productivity in the number of chicks that each pair produces has been declining. Ramsey just about 12, Caldy half a dozen. So Skomer's the important site in terms of breeding for this bird, and that'll be linked almost certainly to prey availability. Just to give you an idea of where the great blackback gulls that are ringed on Skokholm go, most of them are resighted in southwest Wales. I actually recite quite a lot of those in Pembrokeshire on the mainland, but you'll see there some big bubbles in the southwest around Cornwall. Southern Ireland, Devon, and some into northwest France. So some of them do travel a reasonable distance, but most of them don't. Herring gull. Sad to say it's red listed, despite what most of the press seem to think about gulls, and herring gulls in particular in seaside towns are not doing very well. Caldy is the main site. So I mentioned it earlier. It's actually probably the most important bird on Caldy. Over 1,600 pairs breed on Caldy, believe it or not. But that's down 50% from 40 years ago. So it sounds like a lot, but when you have the historical data, you can put it into context. Um, Skokholm is stable, just over 300 pairs. Skomer has actually gone up in the last year, but it is down from historical numbers a long way down, and Ramsey about 200 pairs. Lesser blackback gull is the gull. If you go to Skomer for the day, this is the gull you'll see nesting in the middle of the island in the largest numbers. So just under 6,000 pairs on Skomer in 2023, but that was down 700 for 2022. So these aren't doing particularly well. For all sorts of reasons. Skokholm, again, declining. In 2017, at over 1,000, we're down to 700 pairs on Skokholm. About 400 on Caldy, so nesting with those herring gulls, and about 60 on Ramsey. One of my favourites, black-leg kittiwake. Fantastic bird, brilliant. The nests they usually build. This one's actually on a ledge. I photographed it on Grasshome last summer. Most of our kittiwakes are on Skomer, and their numbers are up and down. There's no particular trend other than it's been generally down. We have some better years. The last 5 years we've had some good years, some bad years. So 2022 was 1,500. We're down under 1,300 in 2023. And the key thing is productivity. So some years, some colonies raise no chicks, but overall, just as an example in Skomer, it was less than half a chick per nest was the average, which is half that it was over the 5 years previously. So things can change quite quickly for these seabirds. Puffin, Atlantic puffin. This is the one that everybody goes to Skomer for. It's the one that people pay me to take them to see on Skomer. Although obviously I show them all sorts of other birds because puffins are very easy to see on Skomer. This is a good news story. Although puffins red listed in Wales, on it's mainly because of its sort of the risk it faces because it's not in many places, I guess. But actually, the Skomer numbers are going up. So this is a count of individuals, and we're up to around about 42,000, which is an increase in the last 5, 10 years. It's just been steadily increasing. In fact, I think I've got a slide coming up. So counting them is difficult. This is what a raft of puffins look like during the early part of the breeding season. And this shows you the historical number. So to dwell too much on the actual detail, but if you see sort of late 80s, we're looking at sort of 6, 7,000 pairs. We're now 6, 7,000 individuals. The spring count, we're now over 40,000, and it's been going up for the last 15 years. So it is a good news story, and bucking the trend of most of the rest of the world, in fact. Common guillemot. So again, this is one where you really need to look back. At the moment, they're doing well, 40,000 odd individuals across Pembrokeshire, most of them on Skomer, just under 30,000 of those are on Skomer. But if you look at photos of Skomer and it's been studied from the 1930s, you're probably looking at 100,000 on Skomer alone. So lots of issues in the resulting years during the war years and oil spills and all sorts of things have had impacts on guillemots. And in fact, this is just brings it home to you. This was 2023. We had an incident after the breeding season where over 1,000 guillemots washed up on Pembrokeshire beaches, and it proved to be the case that certainly a good number of them were from Skomer. I don't know if any of you subscribe to British Birds, but I think this has just been published by Tim Birkhead, and Ben Hatchwell is talking about that impact. But they're looking at potentially their initial estimates are 20 to 30% decline in 1 year because of avian flu, and there were possibly other things going on as well in terms of food availability. Um, Close relative of the common guillemot and the final orc in the series, razorbill, is doing okay. About 10,000 individuals on Skomer. It's up and down a bit. Productivity varies. It's usually about zero point 0.5-ish per nest. Obviously, they only have one chick, like guillemots and puffins. They all have one chick, so it's all or nothing for them. And about 5,000 across Skomer and Ramsey, and a few hundred on Caldy. We also have some, actually, I should have said that for guillemot as well. With guillemots and razorbills on the Pembrokeshire coast on the mainland, but not that many, and no puffins, of course. Um, Northern Former, another favourite of mine, fantastic seabird. First bred in Pembrokeshire on Skomer in 1960, so fairly recent colonist, and I think there was sort of a fairly exponential growth, and then it sort of checked back a bit. Um, 472 on Skomer, for example, the last count of apparently occupied sites, which is their study of pairs. But productivity in 2023 was only 0.22. So that's clearly not sustainable, and obviously causes some concern. Um, the similar numbers on Ramsey and Skokholm, they're about 250 to 200 pairs each, and about 100 pairs on Caldy. There's definitely less on the Pembrokeshire mainland now. You struggle to find them on the Pembrokeshire mainland, so not quite sure what's going on with formers. Um, European storm petrel. So this is a secretive breeder of the Pembrokeshire Islands. Those of you who are sharp-eyed might also spot there's another storm petrel species in the photo. This larger one here is a Wilson storm petrel. It just happened to be the best picture I've got of European storm petrel, which are the other five. And the most important site for these is Skokholm. So Skokholm has over 2,000 nest sites. The last whole island survey was 2016. Very difficult to survey, as you can imagine, but the ones they study are showing that it looks fairly stable. So we're sort of assuming at the moment, until the next full survey, that that's the case. They breed on Skomer, probably 200 pairs. The Bishops and Clarks off Ramsey have maybe 150 pairs, and maybe Ramsey itself has half a dozen, and there's a couple of pairs out on Grasshome. And again, ringing on, particularly on Skokholm, this is a map generated by the Skokholm team. Shows you where they've caught ringed sort of storm petrels, where they've come from, which is the red dots. So where they've arrived, where they've previously ringed, so all around the UK, basically, particularly the southwest, and where the Skokholm birds have been resighted, largely in southwest Wales, but across Southern Ireland and a few down in northwest France. So very, very mobile are the storm petrels in the UK. And some of you may be aware of this. Richard and Giselle, the current wardens, have worked with various people, and they've sort of recreated the herringbone walls, which are made from the old red sandstone on Skokholm, and they've built what they've called the petrol station, which is absolutely fantastic. In fact, that this is the one that's at the quarry below the lighthouse, which has been there for a few years and now has breeding storm petrels in it, which is also enabling them to be monitored very closely because some of the boxes have got cameras in. And there's another one that's just been built called Petrol Station 2, which is actually by the buildings in the middle of the island. So very, very interesting project that will help us to understand a lot more about storm petrels. My final two seabirds, these are probably my favourite two. The gannet. So this is Grasshome. There's a lot of gannets on Grasshome, as you can see, and they like nesting very close together. Um, they're fantastic birds. I'm sure you know a lot about them. The largest seabird that breeds in the UK, 6 foot wingspan, adaptation so that they can dive and hit the water at 100 kilometers an hour. Their nostrils are on the inside of their bill. They can virtually dislocate their wings when they dive. They're just incredible birds. And there's been a nice history of the gannets on Grasshome increasing. So when the RSPB bought the island in 1948, there was an estimate to be about 7,000 pairs, and that got up to in 2022 just over 34,000 pairs. You'll see this bird here's got a yellow ring, and that's what I spend my time doing when I'm on grassland is looking for those rings, which is helping us understand more about adult survival. And some of the birds are fitted with trackers, so we know where they go. I don't expect you to take all this slide in, but I'm more than happy to share this afterwards, and I think the talk is going to be shared online anyway. But this down in bottom left here, this map is from the tracking, and it shows they've learnt. Um, I say they because it's not me doing this piece of work, but a lot about where gannets go to feed and how long they're away for. So they're generally away for about 24 hours when a bird leaves, one of the pair leaves. When they've got a chick to feed, they go away for about a day. Females slightly longer than males, and females tend to go a bit further as well. But also in winter, we found that females winter generally further south and actually often put themselves a bit closer to where there are known to be illegal fisheries and they're more likely to be caught. So potentially females are facing more threats than males. And so there all sorts of things that have been discovered by studying gannets, not just on Grassholm, but on other islands such as the Bass Rock. I mentioned bird flu already and the threats to seabirds. So, unfortunately, avian influenza struck Grassholm. This was in 2022. I was unfortunately the person who saw the first dead birds, and from that point forward, we didn't visit the island to obviously avoid spreading. But it had a significant impact on the birds. So I mentioned in 2022 we were talking about 34,000 pairs. The estimate from last year is just over 19,000. So we've lost near enough 50% of our gannets kind of in 1 year. And there may be other sort of impacts of that. And I think I've got a picture coming up. Yeah, this is a picture from this year. This at the front here is the edge of the colony. Okay, so most of the birds are inside the colony, surrounded by other birds. But can you see this big hole here? This is just one example where all these birds died. And what you've now got essentially is a lot more edge. And what we've noticed, this is just anecdotally, is the herring gulls were taking a lot more eggs because they were bolder. They could get in amongst the colony, which they couldn't do before. And the productivity figures from last year are not good at all. So it's quite possible that we're going to see a continued decline in the gannet population. Just to end on one positive, so I mean, it's still positive that we've got a lot more gannets there than we had in 1948. This is a leucistic gannet. We nicknamed him or her Pinky. You see the difference between this bird and the bird behind with the black feathers and the black bare parts. This bird was completely white feathers and pink bare parts. So I imagine if anyone gets to see that on a sea watch, it would cause them a bit of a shock. But first one we've ever seen. It definitely, well, this was early September. It was about to fledge. So it was the last visit, 3rd of September, I think. So fingers crossed Pinky made it. I'm just going to finish the seabirds before I just finish off with the rarities, the next couple of slides on the Manx Shearwater. So, people who come to visit Pembrokeshire Islands and particularly Skomer, they come to see puffins, and why wouldn't you? But actually, puffin, although it's doing well on Skomer in particular, it's not the most important seabird, or it's not the reason Pembrokeshire is important for seabirds. It's Manx Shearwater. So across the Pembrokeshire Islands, we hold 60% of the world population, which is just over 450,000 pairs. It's absolutely incredible. Skomer, the last census in 2017, was just shy of 350,000 pairs. Skokholm census was the year after. They were just under 89,000 pairs. The Midland estimate, based on a slightly smaller study, is 16,000, and Ramsey, um, which had only about 500 pairs when rats were eradicated in 2000. The last census in 2022 um, gave us 6,225, which is an incredible increase. I think they were there and trying to breed, but just the rats that were there, were just keeping them at bay. As soon as the rats were gone, they were off and running. And this is a close up of a Manxie that you don't often get. And the only I say it's an unfortunate thing about Manxies, of course, because they nest in burrows. When people go to Skomer, despite people like me trying to say how important it is, and it's the most important bird on the island, people don't see them very rarely anyway. Occasionally, one gets caught outside of a burrow and has to depart quickly or face being eaten. Occasionally, you hear them, but you need to stay overnight to see Manx Shearwaters, and it's a magical experience to be. Some of you have probably been to Bardsey and been amongst the colony there. I mean, Skomer's something else with 350,000 pairs. I just got a couple of slides to finish, and I couldn't not talk about the Pembrokeshire Islands without talking about their place in sort of British bird watching history in terms of rare birds. So because of their geographical location, they obviously attract rare birds, and partly that's down to observer effort because there are wardens on three of the islands for most of the year, particularly when the rare birds would turn up during migration, spring and autumn migration. They're obviously covering a smaller, discrete area, and the fact that they stick out a bit from the mainland also adds to the sort of the rarity appeal. I've got three slides here. One for the three main islands. This is Ramsey's sort of part of its history of rare birds. So top left is an indigo bunting from North America. This was the first British record. In 1996. There's been a couple since, but there's still only a handful of British records. Very, very rare bird. To the right is a myrtle warbler or a yellow-rumped warbler, the Eastern America, another one from America. Ramsey's actually had two. The pictured one is one that was seen in spring in 2019. There was a previous record in the 1990s in the autumn. Bottom right is one of the rarest birds that Ramsey's ever seen. It's a bay-breasted warbler. This was part of an influx of American landbirds to the UK in autumn 2023, particularly a short period in late September. And Ramsey had this bay-breasted warbler, which was only the second ever for Britain. So that was quite something. And not quite as rare, but just as stunning. On the bottom left is a western subalpine warbler. The reason I've included it was seen last year, so it's quite recent, but also it's the earliest ever in Britain. It was seen on the 17th of March, which is very early for a spring migrant. They usually turn up in April and May. That was quite fantastic. Moving south down to Skomer. Skomer's a long, long list of rarities. Starting top left, this is a dark-eyed junco, which was present in 2017 in the spring. That was a first for Pembrokeshire. There's actually been another one since, surprisingly. Top right is Nigel very kindly mentioned. I've had a reasonable track record in finding rare birds. So I actually found this one. This is a snowy owl. The last thing you expect to find on Skomer at the end of May, but that's where it was. It actually previously been seen near St David's, and I believe the same bird was seen in North Wales. So there we are. There's a bird that connects us. Bottom right is a cracking spring lesser grey shrike that was on Skomer in May 21. And bottom left, I've cheated here. So the species is a Blackburnian warbler. Unfortunately, this picture wasn't taken on the Pembrokeshire Islands. It was taken on Shetland. But it's a Blackburnian warbler from North America, and the first British record was recorded on Skomer on the 5th of October 1961 by the then warden David Saunders, who sadly passed away last year. So probably the rarest bird Skomer's ever had, and it'd be nice if we could have another one. And just to finish, we've got Skokholm. And so Skokholm being a bird observatory, it has probably more effort. It's a slightly smaller island than the other two, and they ring there obviously because it's a bird observatory. And that even in just the last 10, 11 years, the track record is incredible. Top left is Alder Flycatcher, which was also 2023. That was a third for Britain. Swainson's Thrush top right. That was in June 2015. It was the first spring record for the UK. Bottom right is a Tennessee warbler. That was the first for Wales. I think it's still the only Welsh record. That was as recently as 2022. And bottom left, a bit grainy, but this was taken in 1990. This is a white-throated robin, which spent a few days in the cottage garden that I showed you right near the beginning of the talk. It was the second British record, and I think there's only been one since at Hartlepool. So again, it'd be nice if we had another one. I'm going to finish there. I think I've just about managed to do that in an hour. I hope that wasn't too rushed. I'm going to finish with a picture of my partner Lisa, who I mentioned at the beginning. She works for the Wildlife Trust, and we get involved in rescuing Manx Shearwater. So some years are busier than others. Last year, our team of volunteers handled 600 Manx Shearwaters on the Pembrokeshire mainland, which were disorientated, and our success rate of releasing them, they're nearly always healthy, and we get them back out to sea as soon as possible. And this is releasing one at St Anne's Head with Skokholm in the background. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, yeah, well, Dave, thank you very, very much. That's a lovely way to end a great enemy loss. So please, if you're out there and you've got one, then shout out now. It'd be lovely to hear from you. Quite like to start the ball rolling, Dave, if I may, just to check with you what the oiling incident situation is, because I think we're all aware, poor old Southwest Wales used to get clobbered by oiling incidents in the sort of 60s and 70s. Has that really improved?
Sorry, just unmute myself there. Yeah, it's a good question. You might remember the most recent incident, large incident we had was the Sea Empress in 1996.
Hmm.
I actually worked for the National Rivers Authority at the time. I was involved in the sort of the aftermath of that. That was really bad, and it was obviously very close to the islands. The islands themselves managed to miss the oil, but a lot of the adjacent mainland didn't, and we lost a lot of sea ducks, for example. But we also lost guillemots, and but they recovered very quickly. As I said, it's a positive. Story in terms of the impact of that. And actually, since then, we haven't had what I call an oiling incident. I think there's been the odd obviously we've got the Milford Haven waterway, which is incredibly important for oil and gas. And there's the occasional small oil spill. I remember one that found its way down to Dale, but we're talking hundreds of litres rather than
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands of litres.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's good. Right. Any more questions, please?
Eris is asking in the chat, were many Manx shearwaters lost to avian influenza?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kara. So the good news is absolutely none. The only bird flu, the species that we've had bird flu in numbers has been the gannets in 22 and the guillemots in 23. Obviously, the gannets took the biggest hit. Guillemots have had a hit, but not quite so severe. We've had a few other birds of individual species, probably a bit like yourselves, the odd gull, the odd bird of prey, but very isolated incidents. But I'm aware that bird flu hasn't gone away. Possibly, we might be looking at a bit of an outbreak coming our way if from what I pick up on the news in terms of poultry being kept indoors in some places now. So yeah, it's something we're very vigilant of, and the island staff in particular during the breeding season, they're very alert to anything. I mean, we see dead bird. If you go to Skomer in the spring, you'll see dead Manx shearwaters because they get predated at night. But if there was anything unusual in terms of location or concentrations, then we would be getting birds tested. They've got the ability to take swabs and get tests and getting results very quickly. So I think they're probably going to be okay because of the way they breed in separate burrows is probably, for Manxes at least, something that's going to help them.
Thanks, Dave. Any other questions?
Thanks, Dave. Really good talk. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, just a few things really. I learned a few things. I didn't actually realize great blackback gull was the biggest gull in the world, and sort of so is it Ramsey 100 pairs of wheat here? Is that quite a high density for a relatively small island?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it must be. Have you ever, I don't know, have you ever been to Ramsey?
No.
There's an impressive network of stone walls that particularly run on the northeast side, which is the bit that's been farmed. So when they need sheep, that's where they put them, and they maintain in the walls because they want to be able to graze and keep the short turf for Chough. So they just love those walls. It's possible that Skokholm actually has a higher density because I think it's sort of 35, 40 pairs. It's quite a bit of a smaller island. It's probably fairly similar. I
Mm,
think Skomer's less. The walls aren't in such good condition, and there's an awful lot of bracken um, on on Skomer. So you've probably got less short, they like short grassy areas, rocky outcrops, don't they? So,
mm,
but yeah, I mean, compared to the mainland, I think they're very dense.
yeah. And you were saying Skomer's got an endemic subspecies vole.
Yeah, that's right. So there's bank vole on Skomer. It's actually also on Ramsey. It's a bit of a moot point actually because it's known as the Skomer vole. It's a
Mm,
subspecies of bank vole. They're larger,
mm,
quite a bit larger actually, and they're sort of more gingery in colour. I should have put a picture of one in the talk because they're quite important. But they're not a separate species, but they've obviously evolved slightly differently, and they're actually the main food source of short-eared owls. So they love them.
yeah. Oh, interesting. Brilliant. Cheers. Thanks.
No problem.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions? Any other questions? Dave, yeah, and it may be a bit unfair. This is about New North Wales. Um, Often when you showed the map of the dispersal of the birds from Grasholm, that actually didn't seem to make it up into into Liverpool Bay, though they were in Cardigan Bay and other parts of the western approaches, of course. But does that suggest that your birds aren't actually coming up much further north than the Fleam Peninsula, and maybe our gannets have come from some of the Scottish colonies? It would be really interesting to know, I think. And maybe somebody out there does know, but that just prompted me seeing that interesting map of dispersal that you kindly put together. Any thoughts
Yeah,
on?
yeah. So I know a little bit about that. So the map you
Mhm.
saw, I think, was sort of foraging trips
Yeah.
of adults
Okay.
from the colonies. Okay, so you're right to
Mm.
point out that they mostly go south and west.
Mm.
Which ironically is where the wind turbines are planned for. So that's one
Ah,
topic of,
yeah.
of discussion.
Mm.
In terms of birds moving, so what we do know is that non-breeding birds do move around the colony. So, if you think about avian influenza on grass home in 2022, it had to come from somewhere. So a
Mm.
bird brought it from somewhere. Now, if all the grass home gannets, the breeders, are basically going out to the southwest of Celtic Deep and coming back again, you would think they're
Yeah.
unlikely to pick up avian influenza from other
Mm.
gannets that aren't feed. They're all grass home gannets. So, but what we do have, and grass home's quite interesting. There's a what they call a club site. There's a rock. It's part of grass home, but it's on one corner, which there's no breeding gannets, but you get a lot of non-breeding birds. So birds between 2 and 5 years old. And we do know from ringing, although mostly it's adults that are breeding that are ringed, that there is some movement between around the British colony. So the little colony that's established itself in North Wales, yeah, I think it's just as likely to come from somewhere else, possibly even
Mhm.
Ireland. I don't know whether there's any evidence whether any ringed birds have been seen there, but yeah, it's a very good question, and it could be the answer might not be what you'd expect.
No, no, no. Thank you. Any other questions? We've got one from Tony. With a lack of trees, do the breeding buzzards share the cliffs with their prey?
Thanks for the question, Tony. Yes. So the buzzards on the islands do breed on the cliffs along with the peregrines.
Mhm.
Um, the buzzards are generally we got lots of rabbits on Scone, which I didn't mention, and Skokholm and Ramsey. Lots of even more rabbits on Ramsey. So the buzzards, I think, are largely taking rabbits. But if you look at peregrines, their nest sites are there's one at the Wick on Skomer. It's bred there for the last 2 years. In fact, it's the female from Ceredigion, and they're right in the middle of an orc colony. So there's puffins, guillemots, and razorbill, and you sort of think to yourself, what that doesn't seem. Why would that work? And I rarely see peregrines there taking prey from the colony. It's the colony that they're in amongst. I wonder
Mhm.
whether if they started doing that on a regular basis, the colony would just say, right, well, we're moving. It would be to the
Yeah.
peregrine's detriment. I'm
Yeah.
not sure, but I do see them occasionally take puffins, and they tend to take them not on the wing, but by just walking along the grassy ledges and waiting outside a burrow.
Okay.
Quite a lazy way of taking
Yeah.
puffins, I guess.
Amazing. Dave, I'd like to give you the opportunity to say a little bit more to the audience about your plans for this year, what trips you're doing, and whether you've got any new ventures.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, I mean, for me, this year is much of the same as the last few years. So I'll be doing some trips to Skomer. I will be doing a few overseas tours. Well, in fact, I've got a trip to Scotland, sort of overseas, isn't it? At the end of February, and then I'm off to Georgia and Armenia again in the spring, and I shall be off to Oman again in the autumn. So Oman is the one I do most regularly.
Mhm.
That'll be my ninth tour. I do pelagic trips off the Pembrokeshire coast, so from July to September, we go off out into the Celtic Deep looking for the rarer seabirds. So
Yeah.
Wilson, storm petrel, and the large shearwaters, and anything else that might be along there, whales and dolphins as well. So,
Mm.
and I'm pleased that I will be. The work I do with gannets was due to come to an end. My initial 5 years was up last year, but
Mm.
it is actually funded largely through offshore wind in terms of it's using Grasshome as a comparison site to Bass Rock, where there's
Mhm.
been an offshore wind development there. So
Yes.
we're going to thankfully got some funding to continue studying gannets in detail on Grasshome. So at least this year, possibly next, I shall be the fortunate to land on Grasshome a dozen or more times.
Mm. Great stuff. Sounds a busy year. Some mouth-watering prospects of places and birds to see. Yeah, well, good luck with all those, and I'm sure that's whetted a lot people's appetite. Oman certainly is something that Bird Group has enjoyed hearing about from one of our members, Rhys Jones, recently, and it's a stunning place, isn't it?
Yeah,
Lots to offer.
it's brilliant. Yeah, it's a
Mm.
great overseas destination. It
Yeah.
really is.
Well, look, Dave, it's my very pleasant task to thank you for tonight's fabulous talk. This has been really entertaining and very informative. Goodness, very thorough indeed, and so up to date. Really objective account from somebody who's got clearly such a wide knowledge and experience of not just one but all of the island chain that you've covered so well and ably this evening, and given us such a brilliant assessment. So much information there, which, yes, as you said at the beginning, we could perhaps have found out if we'd been diligent enough over quite a few hours, but we've had the luxury of having it handed to us on a plate in an hour by you this evening in our own homes, and that's been a real pleasure and a real treat. I can imagine that not only do I speak for everybody in saying that, but I can think of at least five people, sadly only one of them still with us, who would have equally enjoyed it. And I think it's testament to your knowledge and expertise that I say this. Ronald Lockley, one of the greatest pioneering seabird researchers, and so strongly associated, of course, with the Pembrokeshire Islands, would have just loved it. So too David Saunders, as one of our leading conservationists, seabird conservationists, who did so much for the islands that you've been talking about, and was responsible to a large extent for their long-term conservation. Ian Bullock, who I was really very sorry to hear had passed away, and Ian worked on Chough here in North West Wales over many years, including South Stack, and had a real feel for these birds and their habitat, and would have loved hearing about the Southwest Wales equivalents, and was great at articulating his enthusiasm for these birds, as indeed was another person that I think would have just loved to hear your talk, Bill Condry, of course. And Bill, as one of our most respected writers and commentators on Welsh birds, gave a wonderful chapter on Welsh Islands in his 1981 classic on Welsh wildlife, which really I'm tempted to read again, knowing a little bit more about things as you've explained them tonight. And all that book was written in 1981. It's books like that and information that he collated that act as such a useful comparison with the things you've told us this evening. And in many cases, I'm glad to say there's been increases in numbers, not all the while, but he would have been thrilled about the eradication of rats and the results on Ramsey that have flowed from that. And finally, and happily alive with us, Tim Birkhead, who we've had the pleasure of hearing at Bird Group fairly recently, and whose book on the Great Auk is about to come out in March. Will be a great, and so much to promote seabirds from his long-term studies on the Welsh Southwest Welsh Islands, and that just puts it in a modern research perspective how important these islands are for our proper understanding of seabird ecology and marine ecosystems. And it's having these wonderful islands at our disposal in terms of access, observatories, proper, well-founded science, and people there to explain all this that's so important. And I think your islands are a wonderful example of that. I'm so pleased that somebody like yourself, with such enthusiasm, knowledge, and an ability to articulate that to people, is there doing it so well. And long may that continue, and good luck with your company, both in Wales and overseas. And thank you too for treating us at the end to those great rarities. Everybody loves a rarity, and clearly there's always a good chance where you live, and you've done better than most in that department. So well done to you. It's been a fab evening. We couldn't have asked for more. And thank you very much for your time and effort putting it together, and spending a good part of your evening with us this evening. Dave, good luck in the future, and diolch yn fawr iawn from us all. Bye now. Bye bye.
Thank